I'm Eddie McCoy, and I'm glad to see everybody come out to the program that going to the library. I appreciate that they are presenting my work, and I want to give them credit for supporting me, and I want to give the board of the library, and I think I'm so excited that they will take the opportunity to look at my work and see if it's worthy of them taking a look at it and see if it's worthy of them putting some of my work in the library. It's not, they have to take a good hard look at it, and I think that they found out that it might be worth them investing in it. And so that's why I'm so humble, excited about it. And I have Dr. Tyson. We've been knowing each other for 40 years. He say before I got married.
40 years?
That's we have got divorced, yeah. Professor, Dean, and Dr. Omar at UNCG. We've been lucky 20 years. Yeah. I was doing research and didn't know what I was doing. Just compiling stuff, running here and just running around compiling information. And it was Walter Patilla up in northern part of the county. I was doing some work. I'm just pulling work in the library, and he started doing work on Walter Patilla and the fusion. And he came through here looking for work, and he stumbled upon some of my research, found out that Span Montague, I think, was here, and told him that it was a rookie in here being nosy in everybody's business and papers. Take a look at mine, some of the stuff I had accumulated, and he looked at some of my work, and like a book came out of it. And that's when we met. He called me and told me, and so Dr. Tyson came and, with doing a thesis. Wanted me to work with a thesis. I didn't know what he's talking about. And
Neither did I.
And I asked him what he did. He said, yeah. And I said, is this how far we're going? He said, this is how far we're going. And we came up with a movie. I don't know how we got from a thesis from Duke. It went down to Emory University in Atlanta, went all the way there and come all the way back. And then it went out to Wisconsin, went all the way out there and come back. He went down to Emory, came back, it was working on the doctors, went out to Wisconsin and come back. They're going to do a movie. I said, Tim, when are we going to start? He said, I don't know. And so Dr. Holt, this is crazy too. I was doing some research about slave plantations, and I went and asked Mark about anybody ever done slave plantation. He told me Sally Hopkins had done something out at Big Zion in that area, Vance County. And he said, she knows something about her plantation. I said, well, did she do about her family? And he said, yes. He said, yes, she did it on her family. And he said, and I went to Mark, I said, Mark, do you have a book in here on called Making Freedom Pay? And he said, yeah. He said, I tell you what, why don't you go home and see, don't you have one? I said, what the heck am I gonna do with a book called Making Freedom Pay? He said, you go home and see, don't you have one? You know what I did? I went home, I have a collection of books. And, I didn't think I would have that book. And so I had the book. And I went home and came up with the book. And I said, I'm gonna call this lady and let her know that I'm down in the country. And I need help. And when she listened to me, come down and look. And she went back and she said, I'll come down last spring. And I thought this lady was out of my mind. She brought 2 students and came down and looked at what I was doing. She said, I'll be back. And so that's how I met her. And then about a back catcher on the baseball, Miss Vera Cecelski, this lady right here, she's Stagville. She's Mr. Stagville, Miss Stagville. She's the director, she's everything in Stagville. I started out with her father, with Tim, I was way back when she was a kid. When I started with her father, what, about 15 years with her father. Yeah, something like that after Tim, yeah, about 15 years with her father.
By 1990.
He got tired of me, her father got tired of me. I got something else to do. But I was blessed that Tim told me that I had the smartest lady in North Carolina, if I could convince her to work with me. I said, just tell me where she is, I don't have no problem. And I ended up, she listened to me. She sat down and she said, I'll listen to you, Mr. McCoy. And when I finished letting her know the situation I was in, how much help I had, she felt sorry for me. She said, I'll help you. And these are my friends. This is how I got here with these friends of mine. And so he will introduce his grad students, his 2 grad students, Dr. Ali will. And so I welcome everybody and appreciate you coming. And please come back again, and I hope you like the presentation.
Great, thank you. You can clap. Thank you. You got it on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Welcome, and thank you all for being here today. Again, my name is Omar Ali. I serve as Dean of the Honors College at UNC Greensboro and Professor of History. And I did meet Eddie some 20 years ago. I was a graduate student finishing up my PhD at Columbia University, and I came down here, and he was one of those people that you meet and you're like, this is going to be good. He is a connector. As you can see, the people who are here are people that he's known for a long time, and we're joined by Kaila and Ali Beatty, who are graduate students at UNC Charlotte Public History Program, and Ali's starting at UNC Greensboro. But I think that Eddie's particular brilliance is finding people who can expand his knowledge and network and resources, and he's masterful at that. It's not something that you can teach. He just does this naturally, like he just breathes this stuff. He's also somebody who's able to synthesize knowledge in ways that are quite extraordinary. His oral history collections are at the Southern Collection at UNC Chapel Hill, and he's contributed in multiple ways to a variety of projects. And I've had the pleasure of having him come to the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, to speak to students before. And this is being live broadcast, so hello out there. It will be recorded. The library is going to be recording and putting it on the YouTube channel. And just again to offer our thanks to Andrew Maloney, who's not here. He's the director of the library. Mark, who you'll be meeting, he's in the library room there. He'll be doing a genealogical workshop. And Melanie, who's helping out today, and I just had the pleasure of meeting. So this is a conversation about really uncovering African-American history in this Granville County area, and Oxford is obviously the seat of that, and this library is at the heart of that. And what we've been doing for many years is trying to compile and really follow Eddie's lead. That's what we're doing, and really follow the work that he's been doing to bring out the history by doing a combination of archival research, working with court documents and sort of public government documents, really a sleuth. He's got this nose, and he has a sensibility that I don't think that you can't train. In fact, I think it's his lack of training, formal training, which has allowed him to see possibilities and openings. And that's really important. We know that in the history of intellectual thought and history of science, that it's people who are a little bit outside of the institutions that can bring a lot to those who are in institutions. And if you will, there's an interplay which he's masterfully orchestrated with people both in institutions, universities and centers, in Stagville and other places where people are gathering, and people just out in the community. So he spent years and years speaking to people and tape recording their stories. And so we're very grateful for that and collectively for that work. And so we're thrilled that you're here. I will just briefly say that a way of understanding, and I'm just going to offer a few comments, and then I'd like to have first Dr. Tyson speak, That'll be followed by Dr. Sharon Ann Holt. We'll have Ali Beatty and Kaila Dollard speak, and then we'll have Vera before giving it back to the floor for Eddie for some final comments, and then a Q&A, okay? How does that sound? Good?
Good.
All right, so we have a plan. So I'll just say very briefly that there is so much history here. And as much as we've written books and things like that, there's a lot more to be uncovered. And that's what we're in the process of doing. I think many of you, who here is from this area? Show of hands. Okay, a number of folks, okay. So you know that history. You know it from your own family's traditions. You know it from your own reading. You know it from movies, watching YouTube, and what have you. There's all kinds of things that we're beginning to uncover and stories. And anything that you want to bring to us, we're very happy to do this. It's a collective work, and we're, I think, following Eddie's lead in not being knowers of stuff. We know some stuff and we can offer that, but we're also open. So in that spirit, we're gonna have a conversation, and I'll give the floor to Dr. Tyson, who is, come on up, Tim, if you don't mind. Dr. Tyson is Senior Research Scholar at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University and Professor of American Studies at UNC Chapter. With that, Dr. Tyson.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I can't tell you how important this library's been to me. My mother would bring me up here on Saturday mornings, every Saturday morning, and we would leave here laden down with books. And the only thing I don't like, this library is much improved over the one I went to. The only thing I don't like is it doesn't smell exactly like the one that it used to be. It had a smell. We've been reading fairly recently, and it would take me back to this place where my imagination could run wild, and it was one of the big pleasures of my life, and had a lot to do with my love for books and pursuit thereof. There's a oil painting of Thad Stem. Thad Stem was our neighbor, and he was my first writer. And he would stop me on the sidewalk over on Hancock Street or on Front Street and say, he smoked Camel Shorts, chain smoked them all day long. He said, boy, I heard you wrote a poem. Say it for me. I would plead, I can't remember. He said, don't lie to me, boy. You remember every word you ever wrote. March winds blow, kites fly high, higher in the sky, or whatever it was. Anyway, he made it imaginable. And we would walk up here together too, and he made it imaginable that you'd be a writer. I didn't think it was some esoteric thing. I thought some people are lawyers, and some people are plumbers, and some people are carpenters, and some people teach school, and some people are writers. And he had an office above Rexall Drugs, and I would go there, and he would buy me a Eskimo pie, and I'd go up there just to see how it smelled, that musty smell. He had a big old typewriter, must have weighed 100 pounds there, and it was a magical thing. I'd get back there and bang on it a little bit, but so it's good to be home as ever. Came here in a different way. When I was in 1982, I was a 24-year-old freshman at UNC Greensboro, and a special student. If they would let you in if you were over 22, and you were a special student, which meant you were on academic probation. If you could do the work, you could stay. So it worked out for me, and it's always good to see you, Omar, because it just reminds me of my being rescued by UNC Greensboro. Anyway, and one of the things I did, a fellow named Bill Chafe came to UNC Greensboro and gave a talk on oral history. That meant you go and find the people who actually lived the history, and you talk to them first, and you get their version of events. And that's the proper place to start, with the human story, and with the human story by the people who lived it. And you documents and all the other kinds of research that we do, that's important to add, and that lets you put things in context and weigh things, but you start with the human element. And it appealed to me so much that I went to Radio Shack and got a tape recorder. And I rode up here to Oxford the next Saturday and interviewed Robert Teal and asked him why they had killed Dickie Merrill when I was 11. And what did he think about it now? And he said, the first thing on that tape is that N-word committed suicide, wanted to come in my store and four-letter word my daughter-in-law. He was telling me he had killed a man for allegedly using profanity or making some kind of flirtatious remark to a woman at a cash register, which itself, other people who were there said he had misunderstood that, as well as obviously many other things. But that was part of what made me a historian, to try to figure out, why were adults insane as I was growing up? And why was everything catching fire all the time? We went from Oxford. I remember the fire that burned down much of these warehouses in the middle of town. You could see the fire in Durham, they said, and I was 4 blocks away. It burned on in my mind. And then we moved from here to Wilmington, and Wilmington was worse. So it kept me wondering, where did this all start? Like, there must be something to this. When did it start? And that, of course, where that ends up. You end up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean with several million dead Africans who speak to us even now. And that's deep, so to speak. What Eddie McCoy has done is to record a community, one place, one county, in a deep way. I don't know of another community in the country who has this kind of historical documentation done of it. And people have deeds and people have documents and tax records and all sorts of things, city directories, but what Mr. McCoy has done is to gather a lot of things that often don't make it into libraries, much of it, the words of people who lived through this. And if you get a chance to look at the James Edward McCoy papers at UNC, which I hope will make their way here because they need to be here, but you could actually write, he interviewed people who were born in the 19th century. He interviewed people who were born in the early 20th century. He interviewed lots of people who lived in a house with somebody who had been enslaved, whose grandparents had been slaves. And you could write a kind of memory book of slavery and Reconstruction out of those interviews, 125 or so interviews. They're full of things like that. The man who told the story of his great-grandfather who was going to be sold away from his children and took an axe and cut his hand off so he wouldn't be sold. Family stories of that are just unspeakable, and yet, other things that are really inspiring and deeply rooted in a kind of community vision that matters so much. So I hope you'll get a look at those papers. They make great reading. And I think that if they were here, then young people in the community could come and write papers about them for school. When I met Eddie McCoy, by the way, I wasn't working on a thesis. I had been in college for about 10 days. I was working on a paper for school. And then I went and did about half a book worth of research for it. But I didn't even know how to write a paper. So I didn't write the paper. So I stayed away I hid from the professor. And he gave me an incomplete. And then the incomplete, they turned to an F after a year. I was ashamed to go see him because I was ashamed that I didn't know how to write a paper. And Alan Trelease, many years later, I sent him a copy of Blood Done Sign My Name. He swore he went and changed my grade. But anyway, Eddie has done this deep oral history. He's done a lot of work on churches and schools in 19th century Granville County, and then now this exploration of slave agricultural operations here in Granville County, which was much bigger in those days. So works of real scope, that these explorations and trying to preserve these places so that we can learn about the lives of the people who lived and worked there. So it's a pleasure to be here with all these folks who are working on this project, and which is so promising. And I do hope you'll support it in any way that you can, if only by paying attention and asking questions and enjoying as it unfolds, because it's there are many, as Professor Ali indicated, there are many more stories to be told, and that's so. I'm glad to be here and just have some small part in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The idea of having papers here that students can use to do historical reconstruction, write papers from, and develop is just, I think, one of the many reasons why we would want to have that kind of primary sources available. We want to really develop the next generations of historians, of scholars, of public historians in particular. And the next person who's going to come to speak is eminently qualified. She actually runs she's the coordinator of public history program and associate teaching professor at Penn State Abington. And it's a real pleasure to have her here in North Carolina. With that, Dr. Sharon Ann Holt.
Well, I just learned something. Never follow a filmmaker. That was really eloquent, Tim. Thank you. And you really have put me on the spot. So let me say also thank you, Omar, for that introduction, and Eddie for yours as well. I'm going to start with a couple of stories. I've chosen them because each in its own way represents a secret history, a known history, a thing that happened, but that wasn't revealed. And it really interests me to talk about that, because I think that's really what we're trying to do here, is capture these unrevealed stories and make them live in the historical narrative. The first story takes place right here in Granville County, at the home of a white man named Thomas Sanford. In 1880, a census taker by the name of Mr. E.G. Butler shows up at Sanford's house and invites Sanford to enumerate his household. If the census taker comes to your household, always enumerate, always tell them everything, because, voting rights and, right, it's important. Anyway, among the people that Sanford enumerates are Omar Ali, whom he describes as a black man, age 50, and a domestic servant, and Nancy Lee, whom he describes as a mulatto woman, age 40, and also a domestic servant. A couple of days later, unbeknownst to himself, Mr. E.G. Butler walks into the home of those very same people, Ottawa and Nancy Lee, and invites them to enumerate their household. On their own turf, the story is very different. Their color doesn't come up, but it does come up that they are a married couple. They are husband and wife. He's not 50, he's 36. She's not 40, she's 26. Which tells you something about the working life of these people. They share their home with her widowed sister, who earns her income as a laundress. And besides being domestic servants for Mr. Sanford, they own 2 acres of land that they farm on their own account. Sanford didn't know the lives of Nancy and Ottawa Lee. Not because they kept it a secret, they were quite open about it with the census taker, but I think because Sanford just wasn't curious. Didn't look, didn't ask, didn't care. So that's one story. Another story is a story told to me by Dr. Barnetta McGee White, whose family comes from Oxford, from Granville, and who had created her own family history, had researched her own family history, and like you suggested, like Eddie has done, deposited her family history here at the Thornton Library, where I found it as a young dissertation researcher. And Dr. White describes finding her own enslaved ancestors because of what she called the breadcrumb trail that they left by naming their children after their forebears. So she could identify, that's my family, those are my people. Third story I want to tell is about a ledger that I found at Duke, actually, Tim, in the archives there, for a plantation that unfortunately is not in Granville County, it was in Beaufort County, owned by a man named Rufus Wharton. Very complicated ledger, but was clearly full of working women, which was what I was interested in. It took me years to figure out what was going on in that ledger, what it was actually recording. I mean, I'm talking years. My advisor was really upset with me because I wasn't getting done fast enough, but I was going to figure out this damn ledger. Anyway, and I made a presentation on the process of figuring it out to a conference, after which an African-American colleague approached me and said, it's a shame how long it takes white people to figure out what my grandfather told me. All right, so these are priceless stories, these memories, records, and interpretive breakthroughs for our understanding of all of our history that are not making it into the stream of resources from which national historic narratives are developed. And that's a tragedy for everybody. There are a couple of reasons they don't make it in. One is, as you were talking about, Omar, there are barriers of degrees and collecting priorities and training that the profession itself, history and public history, have set up. Another is that Black families, for perfectly defensible reasons, have long valued having a protective veil around their survival strategies. Another quick story from Franklin County, actually, that I found in my research. Maddie Curtis, freedwoman, grew cotton on her own account. She had a bale of cotton and she put it in her wagon and she headed off to market to sell it. But when she got to town, she couldn't find the marketplace. And she was afraid to ask directions for fear that would reveal that the cotton belonged to her. So she drove home with her cotton unsold. It was worth it to protect her from reprisals to not sell her cotton. Anyway, and the third reason that these stories don't make it into the narrative is that historians like Thomas Sanford just haven't been curious enough to look. The result is that our profession of public history, my profession of public history, is that another generation is growing up and another generation is growing old with incomplete, even incorrect understandings of our shared past. Let me tell you a little thing about public history. I think of public history as, I like to make an analogy between public history and the food industry. Now, it sounds weird, but bear with me, right? You have, on the one hand, you have the farmers, people like Eddie McCoy, collecting the resources, right? Providing the basis of the whole enterprise, right? And then at the next level, you have the scholars. And I think of them as the butchers and the millers. You know, they're the ones that take wheat and make it into grain. They're the ones that take cattle and make it into meat. Yeah, you with me? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then come the public historians. We're the chefs, we're the restaurant owners, right? Our job is to create an experience and a nourishing meal that's attractive, that people will want to take and will want to take again, right? And it's just as wrong to throw raw flour and raw meat at your guests at a restaurant as it is to throw raw scholarship at the audience through a museum.
Amen.
Yeah. And our job as public historians, which includes, oral history, it includes filmmaking, it includes museum keeping, it includes historic site management, it includes all the ways in which our history knowledge becomes a meal and a nourishing meal for the public. All of that is public history. And if you take out any piece of that, you're in trouble, right? You want to walk your cow into the restaurant, good luck with that. So what to do, right? What to do? Well, it's happening, right? It's happening right in front of us today. And Dr. Ali is doing his part at UNC Greensboro, training up a generation, opening some new doors to becoming a public historian. It's happening in North Carolina Central as well. So this state, your state, is doing a good job opening up those doors, making this profession attractive. Eddie McCoy, as I said, has been doing this for years, collecting stories before the tellers of stories are lost to time, and putting those stories where researchers can find them. This is sacred work. This is absolutely the foundation. The bumper sticker, right? No farmers, no food. No collectors, no history. Same deal, same deal. Tim, in your films, and Vera at Historic Stagville, working to tell silenced stories with rigor, with commitment, inviting people, therefore, to feel and to embrace their importance. But it's not enough, even with all of that, it's not enough for public history to wait for these stories to find a voice. We have to go and seek them out. And that's why it's been such an honor to respond to Eddie's phone call, which came to me in the middle of my office hours. He said, "Hello, I'm Eddie McCoy." I'm like, "Who are you?" Right? That was a year and a half ago. Now I know who he is, or at least I'm beginning to suspect a fragment of who he is. But as all of these colleagues are doing, we also don't just collect the stories. We have to invite the holders of this history into partnerships, welcoming them with stories to share as authorities, to co-create, to co-curate the ways public history institutions share the materials. And I'm so proud, therefore, to be here among all these practitioners on the leading edge of public history, and to be at this library, which has been so valuable to me, that has and will continue to support, collect, and share this essential work. I'm drawn to just imagine a day in October of 2052, 2062, 2072, when another gathering will look back at our work here and now and be thankful for the leadership and the courage that shaped a better future.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to invite both Kaila and Ali to come up. And you mentioned, come on up. And both are right now studying public history. Kaila's wrapping up at UNC Charlotte, and Ali is beginning at UNC Greensboro.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us today. I think I'll take this out. And thank you, Dr. Ali, for inviting me to speak. I've enjoyed being a part of the panel, listening to such great advice about public history and listening to what everyone had to share. It's been really inspiring. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience so far working with the Granville History Project, working with Eddie McCoy, what has been impactful for me. So the reason that I pursue history is pretty much what everyone shared. In school, when I learned about history, there was always something missing. I'm from towards the western part of North Carolina, and I never heard anything about people that looked like me. So as a child and as I went through high school, I started to do research to learn more. about my family, how they fit in, and what I could learn from their historical narrative. So working with the Granville History Project has helped me kind of learn some more skills and learn about another, because any history, especially African American history, I'm very involved and very interested in. So my favorite part of the experience so far is when Eddie and Dr. Ali took us to 2 plantations and we got to visit a slave cemetery. And what was so impactful when we went, we just didn't go to visit the sites. We talked about the stories behind the individuals that were enslaved at the plantation, the names of the individuals, which really humanized the people behind the story, which is something that is really important to me. Who are the people behind the history stories? We hear about these public figures and these big names in history, but everyone has a story, and their story is a part of the larger historical narrative. And when I met Eddie and he talked about collecting oral histories, is something that has been impactful for me as a part of my graduate studies. I was researching Rosenwald schools, and I'm like, instead of just researching, I want to talk to people that went to Rosenwald schools. What were their experiences like? What did they learn? What things did they do? So there's a lot of value in collecting oral histories and learning histories from the actual people who experienced them, instead of just looking at the books and the larger picture. So that is what I have to share about my experience. I've enjoyed it, and I thank you for letting me come, and I'm gonna have Ali.
Good afternoon, you guys. My name is Allison Beatty, and I am a grad student at UNCG. I'm in the Museum Studies program. Much like we've learned from today, we have been following the lead of Eddie McCoy since we met him a couple of years ago. I guess enslaved plantations has not been something that I lean towards just because of the history of enslavement. I do kind of still feel the impact from my family and generations prior. I think that this is something that we do need to continue, especially what we've seen Vera do in Stagville, and learning the archival collections and the names, just as Kaila said. I think that's something that we should constantly continue to bring to the community as well. I did write down a couple of things. I've learned so much from Eddie. You have to write everything down because he speaks at a mile a minute. He knows so much. He knows so much. And I wrote down a couple of things, but I do want to say that my experience as a Granville researcher has been very beneficial in the aspects of learning the development of historic site training and historic site preservation. I've learned so much about the lineage and the narrative of the Hester ancestry, as well as gained a better understanding of the lifestyle and chattel slavery within Granville, North Carolina. As much of the dates that we've read from the anthology of primary source documentation has taken place prior to 1865. Learning the conditions of the enslaved labor and the skill it takes to be able to maintain and preserve the Oaklawn plantation must not have been easy, and we don't necessarily look at the skill that it took to be an enslaved person. I'm not sure if we necessarily look into that. The Hester ancestry is a rare story. They have a rare story in American history where in many cases, enslaved individuals have withstanded legal actions, nonetheless surviving evidence to be able to see as such. They have an amazing timeline of perseverance that that I know Vera will possibly speak more on. We can also see how they have fought for their marriage rights and the right to legally obtain their children. That was something that I personally love to view, especially in times of enslavement. I think the best part about history is learning to see what has survived and what was left. I learned that the understanding of the methodology of the work behind recording public memory and being able to find ways to help continue these narratives throughout the community is very important to me and my family. I personally believe that the best primary sources are often the ones that are around us. And I learned that with my grandmother every day as I was a kid in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, and she was the director of the library in Winston-Salem. I sat there every day and listened to her speak to the children about the history. And it had to be me. It must be me. It must be me to tell the stories. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Who's back here? You know, one of the things that we've been trying to do is really draw from our collective knowledge and experiences around North Carolina. And we did a site visit in Guilford County, which is where we are in Greensboro, to what we call the Underground Railroad tree, which is a tree that is dedicated really to all those who were resisting slavery and were fugitive slaves, runaways. And so that's one area of work that we want to begin to explore here, is looking at runaway slave ads, to look at the ways in which African Americans who were enslaved resisted slavery, tried to get out of slavery, and also worked with the very thin, small, free Black population here. Now, there's always been a small free Black population, so when we talk about anti-slavery movements and abolitionist movements, there was always a Black and white element working together there. You mentioned, Sharon, the word sacred. And I was just thinking about this one scene, and maybe Vera will speak to this, but a very touching scene for me was, it actually makes me feel emotional just talking about it, just having Kaila and Ali with Eddie and the rest of us at one of the grave sites that Eddie was able to uncover. And Sharon had done the lead work to find out the names of those people who were there, and others in the area, and she began to read the names. And it was so moving to hear those names. Excuse me, I didn't expect to be so emotional about it, but to hear the names read out loud. And to me, that was very, very, very powerful. I want to thank you for doing that. And Vera Ciselski is the site manager for Historic Stagville, and has done a lot of work to really make public history something professionalized and continue to really educate the community broadly. So with that, Vera.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I have so impossibly little to add, being at the end of the line after everyone else this afternoon. But I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Vera Cecelski. I'm the site manager for Stagville State Historic Site, which is not terribly far south of us in Durham County. And I'm a public historian there, so I am in that chef role that Sharon so helpfully provided a metaphor for. I have been fortunate enough to be connecting with this group of folks, visiting sites here in Granville County, learning through this experience for a couple years now. The work that I do at Historic Stagville is about creating a historic site that is dedicated to honestly and ethically and fully teaching about the history of a site of mass slavery, a place where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were held in bondage. By the 1860s, the Cameron family, who controlled Stagville, who owned Stagville, reported in the United States Census that they enslaved 983 individuals in North Carolina, including on 30,000 acres of land in what is now Durham and Granville and Wake counties, an additional 8,000 acres of land in Person County, and urban sites of slavery in Hillsborough and in Raleigh. The number of people who they enslaved grew to over 1,000 individuals by the summer of 1864, about 9 months before the legal end of slavery. And so we can only begin to imagine how many people, of course, were emancipated from Stagville, from the Cameron plantations in the spring of 1865, and how many descendants are living here in Granville County, in Durham, Wake, and Orange, and all across the United States. At Stagville, we work with descendant families from North Carolina, but also from California and Hawaii and New York and Michigan and Ohio, slowly bringing back together the stories of these families who have now moved all over the country in some cases. And our work is really about documenting as much as possible of those stories, and our historic site is a public space for people to come and hear those stories. And so many of the themes of the work we do are echoed in what you've just heard from folks today. And I'm very grateful to have been able to visit some of, as strange as it seems, I've been very grateful to visit some of these sites of plantation slavery, of plantation land here in Granville County. Because part of the work we do at Stagville is believing that these spaces, that land, there's a power to standing in those spaces, to hearing those names, to calling the names of the ordinary men and women and children who experienced bondage there. We talk about Stagville a lot as a space that has the possibility, that must be a healing space, not just a sacred space. And Stagville is also part of an international coalition called the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. We think every day at Stagville about what it means for a former site of slavery to be a site of conscience, right? A place where people who are visit are called into a new sense of conscience about what has happened in the past and the way that calls us to think about human rights and injustice in the present. And I've had that same feeling of being in a place of conscience, right? When I've stood at some of these plantation cemeteries, places where we might be standing only in overgrown woods with very little to see, but standing there in a circle with those of us who are here at the table, calling those names, we felt that conscience, right, coming back into us. So I'm very grateful to have been part of this project, and very grateful to be learning every step of the way. So much of what I've learned here from these sites in Granville County has given us a much deeper well of understanding for the community, the connections that shaped the experiences of enslaved and free people at Stagville and their descendants. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think at this point, Eddie, if you would like to add anything, I thought you want to do that now, or we can open up to Q&A. What would you like to do?
We could open it up and then at the end,
Okay. All right, let's do that. Okay. Well, thank you again for all of your comments. Let's open it up to conversation. Do I need to bring the microphone to folks? Is that, does it make sense?
It doesn't,
Okay, this has nothing to do with
it doesn't
that.
matter
Okay.
to recording.
Okay, great, all right. Yes, if you don't mind, maybe saying your name and speaking loudly so folks can hear you.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you. Nice meeting you again. I have your book.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Yes, I have several questions. I'm going to ask Mr. Tyson first. I do a lot of research and working with grants and different foundations. And one of the questions, and I know you touched on this about recording Black history, whereas there's not a lot recorded because we are so protective about history of, of people finding out, and just back in the day, just families being beaten up, just disappearing. So a lot of that history is not there. So my question, Dr. Tyson, is do you have, and one of the questions they ask is pictures. Are there pictures? And that is very hard to find. I have been found, and I was told to talk to you to see if there were pictures of African Americans doing the civil rights struggle here in Granville County, whether it was from the 60s, the 70s, or the 80s. So I would like to know if you have pictures, I can always come find you.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and I will just say this. I got all the way through a PhD in American history at Duke, and it never was even suggested to me that pictures might be a source of information for my work. It was just not something that I imagined, because it was not something that was ever mentioned to me. But of course, at some point the light went on, and because I like to write in detail. I like to paint pictures. I want people to be able to experience. You can't do it. The past history is impossible. The past is gone. It is irrevocably gone. You're trying to conjure it back, and you do the best you can. So I'm trying to do that. Well, what better source than to look at a photograph? My wife will say, how you know he had a gold watch? No, I was like, well, maybe I got a picture of it, you know? So, that's something you can, if it's a good question to ask, and I think it's good that, that's an advanced question to me. It took me a long time to figure it out. There's, for the civil rights era, 60s and 70s, 80s, the best source of pictures I know is the News and Observer files, which are at the state archive.
At the state, okay. 'Cause
Yeah,
I've
up in,
been there,
on,
okay, I can go to the state.
Jones Street by the legislature in Raleigh, downtown Raleigh. And you go in there and they give you white gloves to wear. And what happens is the photographer at the News and Observer turns in her photographs, negatives, right? At the end of the workday, they're put in a little envelope. This is the old way. I'm sure they don't, these things are digital now, right? But there are all these little envelopes and it says where this was and what day it was. And the negatives are in there in order. And you take the negatives and you put them on a light box that lets you see them just like they were when they were in the paper, except every picture you saw in the paper, there are 20 versions of it. They just go tick, 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 tick. And so you can go up there and look at these things from Oxford in the civil rights era, and there is a lot of them.
Okay. Because I've been online and I was surprised to see there was zero history. So basically, I probably need to go in person.
For those you would,
It sounds like I need to go in person because
for
I've
that
done.
particular source, I don't know that,
Trust me.
I also was trained before the digital revolution. I'm almost not qualified to be a historian. Maybe Jessica, who's here with me, is a first-year graduate student, and I'm sure she knows more about the methodology of this than I do. But these guys, but my heavens, I should just not take this question.
Okay, next question. What cemetery did you go to, or Eddie can tell me what cemetery you all went to? It's not public knowledge?
Yeah, part of, just to share, part of how Eddie is so good at what he does is because he uses discretion when necessary. So I think there's some things that we just wanted to keep sort of,
Okay.
I think the individual conversation we can have.
Okay, no problem. Vera, I think you mentioned that you had found the names of the people that was buried in the cemetery. What were some of the names?
So for that particular site that we visited, there is no surviving, obviously for a place, a site where enslaved people were buried, there was, no surviving index of exactly who was buried there, but there were surviving archival records from the enslavers on that property. And so there were surviving names from enslaved people who lived during that lifetime right there. So we do have a list of those that I'm sure I could share with you.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Those are wonderful questions. Thank you so much, really, yeah. Other questions or thoughts, observations? Very open. Yes, ma'am. Over here.
I have a
One
question.
and then two. Yes, go ahead.
And that's regarding the southern end of the county, like in the Wilton area, whether or not anyone has had the opportunity to visit that area to talk to anyone regarding oral history.
Yes. I got tapes on Southern Park, all the way down to, Mr. Lana's church, what you call that area?
Rock Springs.
Rock Spring. I go all the way to Rock Spring.
What about Union and Zion? And I'm interested and curious because.
Miss Thornton,
my family's from-
yeah, I got Miss Thornton,
My relative, Thornton,
and, Parker.
beside Union.
Yeah, well, what's his name? Mr. and Miss Parker come off of, down at, Antioch Road.
Not familiar with the park.
You know who I'm talking about.
Thornton, yes. Those are my relatives, but I-
Roosevelt Greenwood.
Oh,
Yeah, I got her. I got Mr. Ed Grissom.
Grissom, no, my uncle.
Well, that's it, where I got that tape of 3
Where is
hours.
that information compiled at, so that
It'll be
I,
right here in this library
It's
I
here.
hope for July.
in North Carolina room?
It should be about the end of the year, by Christmas, we
Okay.
hope.
Because
I got
often
5
visit Mark
tapes.
Pace
Yeah.
in the North Carolina room.
Yeah, I know.
To find anything.
I get anything you want, and I did 3 hours with him, 4 hours with him. We
Okay.
rolled around, I can tell you, the mosses, the STs, I got every road in there. The Garrets, I went over to Wake County and came all the way up. I got every Garrett, the New Light Church, that man.
That's my church.
Okay, well, I got that. I got New Light Church. I got it all. I got it all in there, and then come into Wilton. And Mr. Parker and ride around, he tell you every dot, every I in there. Mr. Parker.
And my reason for asking is because
Okay.
Cecil Carrington, who was a minister at Union AME Zion Church,
Mhm.
when he passed, according to a newspaper clipping that I got from Mark Pace,
Mhm.
2,000 people attended that funeral in Wilton. Now, how many times can we say that 2,000 people went to Wilton, North Carolina? Southern Indiana County? I can't think of it. I'm not a historian.
But I-
I'm a retired teacher.
I have them. I got
You have that?
in my research.
Okay.
I can in my
Somebody
brain.
will hear you say it?
And got transcripts. I can tell you. Yeah, I covered it. I covered the mosses.
Oh, please help.
Everybody, all of them, then the Garretts, know all about the Garretts, I know all about the SDs, I know all about the Holdens. Oh, I got tape on Mr. Holdens and all of that.
Mosses?
Yeah, I got Mr. Holden. Yeah, I got Mr. Holden, I got them all. Yeah, they had a church, what's the church was down there? The Grissom Church.
Rock Spring Christian and New Life.
I'm talking about the school down there. Was it Grissom School?
Grissom School.
All right, it's Grissom School. People still live in a
Yeah.
house.
We still live there.
Okay, that's right.
Still
Don't I know,
own
it was a
the
house.
land and everything.
Well, people still live in the house of the
Yeah,
school.
they do. The Blackness live in the house now.
That's right. I went there when they did it. That's right. Half of the house is school and half was the house.
Yep.
Come on.
Miss Ingram is one of the teachers.
That's
She was a
right.
Teacher there.
And
I
my
got-
apologies, Patricia Brody.
I got it. I got them all. I got the headstones at the house. And the grave, they destroyed some of the grave because right at the house.
What
I know
about
that's-
the Afro-American school that was behind Union Church in Wilton? Any information on that church,
They call
on that
that,
school, my apologies.
did they call
They
that Granville?
didn't turn that school down, it is, still there now.
It's right
I
now.
think Charlie Gregor taught at that school.
It's right
And,
now.
he would give us the history of how they had, what you call those stoves in the middle of the
Pot
pot belly, and how they would bring, biscuits and pinto beans and have it for lunch.
Yeah.
What was the
And
name?
he was hoping that they
Wilton
would never
School.
tear that, building down, but it's still there. I can't think of the name of
The
it.
satellites on that property. It's called a Wilton School.
That's on the other side of Union Church.
It was another one there. It was a Berry School or something, Berry or something along those lines.
That's in read Mr. Parker's transcript. Barry is something.
Okay.
No, it wasn't that. It's a Barry. I got it in my research.
Berry Gold.
Barry Gold. I got it in my, we put it up on the hill. We put Barry Gold after you cross the Cantermill Road going to 90. If you go the Fairport Road and go take the Cantermill Road, when you cross the bridge, go up the hill to the left. I put Barry Gold to the left.
Is that Highway 56?
Before you get to the 56, when you cross it, when you go up the hill, it's a road to the left. And that road that's why I put Barry Gold there. And the teacher tell you, the teacher that taught that. It's in my book research.
And that will be available when you may.
And the Florida school, when you get to 56, make a right, make a left, and then the first road to the left, Florida school was sitting out there to the right.
Floyd.
Mhm. Got them all documented. I can tell you.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I got it.
Thank you so much.
I can tell you.
Thank you. How wonderful. Yes. Yeah.
My name is Patrice Dunn. My name is Patrice Dunn. I have a question. And actually have a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you. My name is Patrice Dunn. I have a question and a comment. And thank you for this group being here and for the project that you have. I want to follow up on Ross's question concerning photographs. I think that we have, you're correct, we probably don't have an organized system of photographs, but maybe this group can decide how to produce some of that. But I want to share with you a photograph that a group I was with found, not found. It was left to us because the company was going out of business. They said, oh, I got this photograph, we don't know what it is, maybe you can use it. In 2016, I was part of the 200th anniversary of Oxford. And Dr. Helen also was part of the group. And she went over to Cole Printing Company, and they were getting rid of various things and stuff. So what is this? They said, you're doing a history celebration. Here's junk around here. We don't know who left it here. It's yours if you want it. Now we're going to toss. She found this photograph of 40, it looks like it's about 40 African-American teachers here in Oxford.
I got that photograph.
That's right.
I got it.
No, but that's okay. To have the photo, it's good to have the photo, but also there needs to be knowledge that we have it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, they gave the photo to the woman, to her, also. At the time it was given, do you know who these people are? No, that's right. So she formed a committee to find the names of people. And someone suggests they do what's called a graphic outline and numeric, none of that. Good. And now,
I got it.
her group came up with
I got
the
it.
Dr. Pass now that tells you who's on this photograph.
I don't have that, but I have the
That's
picture.
right. So, the thing is, I hope that this is the beginning of something that we can do. My question is, and who do I need to give this to? So you can put it on.
To me.
I want in the university system where it can be online. Who needs to find this information? Tell us how I can get this to other people. We're not just trying to have a knowledge among ourselves.
In my collection.
That's right.
Immediately, I would say give it to Eddie, but let me take also some photographs and
Yeah,
see
yeah.
how to do it. So we can-
But think about things. The reason I mentioned this, and I mentioned also so much to our church too, is that we're creating history every day.
Yes, right.
We could be putting photographs. Matter of fact, now if you probably ask some people, they say, oh, I have this photograph at home. They have other photographs at home. Because this was probably pride and joy of someone at some point in time.
That's right.
But we each having our own little huddle of pictures. The question is, how can we get people condensed and get them outside the huddle into the central place? Can I have one other question too?
Yeah,
It's totally different.
absolutely.
It's a Stagville. I haven't visited, I'm sorry, I haven't visited yet. But my question is, at the time they ended up having around 1,000 slaves, can you tell us what industry they were doing, were they doing cotton, whatever? And how valuable was this whole enterprise?
So I don't know of anyone who set a single dollar value on it, but at the time, the entire plantation was owned by two people in the Cameron family, a man named Paul Cameron and his sister Margaret Cameron. And Paul was reportedly the single wealthiest man in the state of North Carolina, right? And his sister, of course, was among the wealthiest women. So it gives you some sense of the vast profits that they took from the labor of enslaved people there. When many people think of a plantation, they think of a single cash crop or a single industry. But Stagville, the Cameron plantations there were enslaved people doing many, many different kinds of labor on different farms and shops and mills. So there were, the largest farms were grains like corn and wheat and rye and oats. But there also were enslaved families that were forced to grow cotton crops, tobacco, potatoes, to tend apple orchards. There were enslaved people who were raising livestock like cattle and poultry and hogs. And there also were shops and mills. So there were enslaved carpenters, there were enslaved shoemakers, there were enslaved textile workers, weavers who were weaving cotton and wool cloth from the cotton and wool that was produced on the farms. There were grist mills and sawmills, a timber industry powered with water from the rivers. There were enslaved blacksmiths, enslaved coopers, so many different kinds of labor. And of course, if you ever come to Stagville, you'll see buildings that were constructed by some of those enslaved masons and blacksmiths and carpenters, and you can see the vast skill and knowledge and expertise that some of these families have. Obviously, they were being forced to use that labor for someone else's profit, but in some cases, this knowledge of blacksmithing had been passed down in families for generations, from father to son to nephew, and some of these families, took those trades with them into freedom as well, of course.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Something that, I think Ali or Kaila both mentioned, the skill level in some ways that.
I just want to say one thing. If you live down at, like I told you, the Garrett's down in that area, the part of some of that was Stagville. Yeah, so you don't know, some of your family's probably was on the Stagville plantation, because some of that, I researched it, but some of that property right in there was part of Stagville. You got it? A portion of that. What if you take, you know where they live, and going back to 50, somewhere down in there, part of that was part of Stagville.
Or a lot of it was War Falls Lake, or some of it now is Falls
Won't no
Lake.
Falls Lake.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wasn't no Falls Lake
Exactly.
then, but it's Falls Lake now.
That edge of Falls
Yeah,
Lake
see,
into Granville County,
Mangums and
exactly.
Garrett's and all of them were down in there.
Right, some of that piece is part of Stagville. Those families that lived right in there was on the Stagville plantation. But you gotta be nosy like me. You can't get this stuff if you ain't nosy.
And at Stagville, we mapped out all
See?
of that land, and we also have one of the, part of our site's mission is we have a free family history and genealogy research program. So myself and my colleague provide, free research services for anyone who thinks that they might have had ancestors who were enslaved on this plantation. And we write, research reports. We go back through the archives at UNC. We've been able to, we've had folks come to us and ask for, because they've done the work, they have, a family story, that they have a family connection. We've been able to trace, ancestors going back to the 1760s, for example, for some families, through, 4 or 5 generations of slavery. So that's not possible for every family, but if you or anyone you think there's a possibility there might be a connection, that's part of our public responsibility, is to help do that research. So we're always available to do that, and you can just call our office anytime, and we'll be happy to start that with anyone.
We have 2 hands up. I think we'll go with you, ma'am, and then over here.
Okay, I think I heard clearly, Mr. McCoy, when the question was asked about the slave cemeteries, you didn't want to reveal it, right?
Because, let me explain to you. And this is teaching. And, okay, I'm not school trained, but they kind of listen to me because, I put the puzzle together. That's why these professional people listen to me. Like she said, because I talk fast, but I like to do puzzles, like puzzles on the table. I tell them, I like doing puzzles. Okay. I explain if I'm taking you to a slave graveyard, and the nurse been with me, the gentleman in the back, but they don't say anything, I deal with people that don't talk. The first thing when you go to a slave graveyard, you're not going to a slave graveyard, but you're going to your mother and father's graveyard. You got it? You're going to your mother's father's graveyard. We're not going to a picnic, and we're not running there. We go in there to take our time, and those people are dead. Those people mean something. They done worked hard all their life. They done struggled. They've been through hell and everything. So first you got to give them respect. Am I right? Yes. You got to respect them. And that's the first thing when I take professional people. You got to go there quiet. You got to go there paying respect. And then you ask questions, and you don't trample. You just look and let them teach you where to walk, what you're looking for. That's the way you go to a slave graveyard. And the reason you go to a slave graveyard that way, then you can go back on these people's property. And we don't take a whole lot of people, 4 or 5 people, and you go there and you discuss it. And if you don't know, sometimes I take my professional with me and she explains. But what it is that that's what the first thing when you're going to a slave graveyard. And that's why I say we keep it quiet, because that's the way we want to go. If you want to go and you want me to take you, yes, but we're not going there and come back and tell everybody we've been to a slave graveyard. We've been to graveyards, because there's one lady here won't tell me about it. She got a secret, she will keep hers. Miss Peach Pie. But really, that's the way you have to go about it, because people won't let you come back on their property.
Okay. All right, so nearby others in Stagville, is that the only plantation
Where?
in the area? I'm not supposed to ask that.
No, I can take, no.
Because you've done a
Okay.
presentation on,
Huh?
you've done a presentation on different number of plantations in Granville County
Well, yeah,
and
but,
schools. You
yeah,
have.
but,
So I don't know why you just can't say it.
no, I'm not gonna say it.
Yeah, I mean, you have in the past, that's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
right.
No
But-
worries.
I'm not gonna say it because it's being recorded, but, I think that, if we wanna learn about Granville County, we have to take it serious about the history that we should have covered a long time ago. And it's why did we get here to talk about what we're talking about now? When Dr. Holtz came here in 88 or in what, 90?
88, yeah, 88, 90.
889 and making freedom pay. And she researched about Granville County. And all you gotta take her word and take her word, what she did, and you can find plantation and what she did in her work on Granville County, making freedom pay. And what it is one thing that I like about research, I like sharecropping. Sharecropping is a very, very, very important research to do, is sharecropping. If you take sharecropping and walk it backwards, am I right there? Just take it and walk it backwards. You can just take the 90s, anything in the 1800s, before you get into 19, and walk it backwards about sharecropping, and then bring it into the 1900s. It tells you a story. And sharecropping tells you a story. And what I call about it, if you move, you lose. Now, I'll be glad to talk to you about that. When you move, you lose. Every time you move, you lose.
Yeah.
If you live in a house and you got 10 children, you got enough furniture for 10 children. The next farmer, you get mad to put you out, you gotta throw away the furniture. That's what I call moving and losing. And she did the same thing about land. If you take her book and read it, explain it, just a few excerpts about property,
Well, the land.
if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. I'll tell anybody anything they want to know about this. But one of the things that turns up in my research is how difficult it is for free people, for families that acquire land, to keep the land. There's so many ways in which the land is sort of repossessed by white society. And one of the key things, we were just talking about this last night, that free people who purchased land got a deed for it, right? Like anybody would. But they would frequently decide not to come down to the courthouse here in Oxford and record that deed, because they didn't want the white community to know that they owned land. And so when the person whose name on the deed then passes, as we all do, that family can't prove that they own that land, and that land gets scooped away. I mean, there's a huge big story. I mean, by about 1915, we can document Black ownership of about 6 million acres of U.S. land, and that land has just been sort of systematically taken away. And the amount of acreage owned now by African American is much, much, much smaller. So there's all those and other kinds of things that would happen all the time because farming, I mean, I don't know how many of you are farmers, but you know, you got to go into debt to get the seed before you get the harvest, right? That's just the nature of nature. And what would happen then is if somebody passed between getting the debt and getting the harvest, then that debt would swallow up the whole farm. It didn't matter if it was a 125 acre farm and the debt was $14. There were ways, and you probably all know them. Right? So that was another thing. Another thing that I saw was families having to face the moment, planning for their own death, writing wills, making plans for launching their kids, getting some capital together to launch their kids in life. And they would be faced with the decision, this child of mine isn't very promising. I'm not going to leave the land to this child because this child will lose it. A lifetime's work will be lost in a year and a half. This child is more promising. So I'm going to leave disproportionate amounts of land to that child. And what that means then for the next generation is one is landed and the other goes back to being landless. And I mean, what a painful decision, what an agonizing thing for a parent to have to do. But if you were going to preserve anything, you had to be so deliberate and so careful. The other thing I discovered is that most free people, once they acquired some land, even if it was just an acre, almost never acquired more. So that whatever you gathered together for that first big moment, that was kind of it. Because there are exceptions, but the general experience was that was it. Because in order to acquire more, you usually had to reveal that you owned some. And it was just safer not to. It was safer not to. So yeah, there are lots and lots of barriers even once you escape sharecropping, even once you become a landowner. Is that what you
Yeah,
wanted?
enjoy, I'm glad she's here. And one thing about it, you understand what I'm saying now, is that if you take her work, and that's how I looked at my work, is if you lose it, like sharecrop, George, you know this, and what happened were that if you own 2 acres and you're gonna lose it as sharecropping and it's yours, they got 2 loan companies. Tell me, you got 2 loan companies. You got one for the white man that he go borrow money from, and you got one loan company for the blacks. And your interest is higher. And that's why you call you move, you lose. And the interest is higher. Well, the interest, and it's just like a loan company. When if you go to a loan company and borrow money, I thought if you borrow $200, and if I miss a payment this month, I thought it would be okay. But they add the interest and refinance it back again, Jordan. And I didn't know that. And that's the same way they did back then. They refinance it where you'll never pay for the property. And then you ain't got none. That's called moving and losing. You done moved and built up equity in it, and you can lose, and then you go and start again and do the same thing. And start all over again, all over again, all over again. And that's what I call it, move and you lose it. That's, that ain't what these professional people call it, but it's the same thing. Okay.
We had actually one hand over here was first, and then we'll go in the back. And we're actually getting close to having to wrap up because we have the workshop.
Mark says, he says okay to move on for about 30.
Okay, all right.
Mark, can we take 30 more minutes?
Yeah, take your time. I mean, I'm at y'all's disposal.
Okay. We can go another.
Some of the research materials that may be available in the communities, whether it's local or in Raleigh or wherever, is there a listing? Someone has compiled a list of basic research materials and what these materials actually cover. Well, one thing that I'm a UNCG grad. I am a history buff for my family, and I've Mangum family and the Holden families, and I stumbling blocks because the name is William Mangum, and it is just way too popular and way too common, and too many African Americans, and I'm finding it very, very difficult. And then my problem is they're Wake County and Granville County, right on the verge, right there in the New Light community, and I'm finding it just frustrating and overwhelming to get past you know, some of these little stumbling blocks. So if I had access to greater materials or a better knowledge base of what the materials may be available to me, maybe I can fine tune what I need to know.
What you have to do is take your time. It takes a long time to do this work. And you want to do it too fast. It takes years. It takes years.
I've been out of UNCG 40 years now.
Yeah,
Takes a lot of time.
And he works in intervals
I can help you.
of decades. He takes his time. There are 3 hands up.
Yeah, I do
Sharon.
have something for this question.
Okay, yeah, let's respond to this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I sympathize, first of all. But there are a couple things that you can do. There's a lot of literature about how to do genealogy that will tell you some general tips, right? And then I would strongly recommend, you live here in Oxford?
Yes.
Yeah, you should read Barnetta's, Dr. White's family history. In Search of Kith and Kin, I think it's called. And her methods are extraordinarily good. And it'll tell you how to use things like slave deeds, property deeds, stuff like that to get focused in on where you want to be.
I have property deeds but that only takes me, you know, here. I need to go back this way.
So you're trying to get across the slavery boundary.
Yes.
Yes, that's the hardest thing, and she'll tell you in the book how hard it was for her. But it's a wonderful source. It's sitting right on the shelf.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay?
Did you want to say something, Greg?
That is was gonna be exactly my recommendation, so.
Fine, okay.
Thank you. Can you repeat the source so that folks can hear?
Oh, it's called In Search of Kith and Kin. And it's Dr. Barnetta, Mcgee, White.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 hands up. We'll go
With that
to the back. Actually, they're right behind you. So we'll go, I'll just say 1 and then 2,
Two.
man over here, and then 3 in the front. Okay.
I have a question for Vera. My name is Linda. Are you familiar with the Catawba Trail? And can you tell us a little about it? And also if it's related to this Stagville area?
Yes, are you asking about the historic Catawba Trail or the present day Catawba Trail Farm?
I guess in historic.
Okay, the historic trail, yeah. So the Catawba Trail is one name for an ancient indigenous trading path which ran across Piedmont, North Carolina. It has many names through different generations, but it ran, well, if you zoom all the way out to look at the whole state of North Carolina, roughly followed what is now Highway 85. Obviously, not literally block by block, but again, the big picture of the state ran from the Occoneechee territory on the border of Virginia, near Petersburg, Virginia, in a big sweep south, began to turn west, roughly through what is now the Stagville area, the Durham area, and then bent south again down into, you know, what is now South Carolina. That trading path ran right through what became the Stagville Plantation, and by the 1750s, 1760s, the Benahan family, who were the first enslaving family at Stagville, had come into this part of North Carolina from Virginia following that trade route. By that point, this was a wagon road that was being used by white settlers and colonists coming down from Southern Virginia to acquire land in this part of North Carolina in the Piedmont region. And that wagon road, which ran through the Benahan and later the Cameron plantations, what we call Stagville today, of course, was used as a trading route to ship goods and supplies in and out of a large plantation like Stagville, and of course was used as a route to march enslaved people who were purchased and sold in and out of the property. So many of the people who we have been able to trace who were purchased and brought to the Cameron plantations were purchased from sites in Southern Virginia and marched south on this trading route until obviously they arrived at the Cameron land here in the Piedmont.
Thank you so much. We'll go to your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Joy Turner. I'm from Wake Forest. And I was sure I was going to hear sirens when I drove up because I was driving from a 1:30 funeral to try to get here when I heard Mr. McCoy was having this session. I knew I needed to be here. So they're back at the repast and I'm here. I don't hear the sirens yet. I really have been looking forward to this since we talked about it a long time ago. Unfortunately, I missed the better part of it. However, when it comes to plantations, many plantations that I know of personally were lost because people were taken advantage of. I have property, or farm property, that I've traced back to the 1700s by deeds. A part of that property was stolen by a family who was known as a prominent family here in Oxford by having one of my uncles sign a document that he had no idea what he was signing. He put an X on it and his W and lost hundreds of acres of property. I actually saw my own grandfather crying over that because he was one of the younger children who had been slicked out of that property. So that's how a lot of property was lost to African Americans or even indigenous people, which is what that Catawba Trail was all about. Indigenous people were here before anyone. And those people were replaced, displaced, killed, maimed, and other things happened to them. And the property that they were using for growing their trades on that trail was also stolen. So I guess I like Oxford, I grew up here for the most part, but I still have a terrible poison pill in my stomach about Oxford and its history and the part that's never told. How the people who did have property came here, was given property, bought property by saving 20 cents a day or a month or whatever it took. In another case that I knew of personally, the people lost their property because there's a little store off 85 where they would get flour and sugar. And if they had been able to get to town, they would have gotten it for $1. But they were charged $5 and $6 at that store. Needless to say, at the end of the crop time, they weren't able to pay those bills. Now they would ask again, well, sign your X. And they did. And Roslyn here, a lot of people know the real history of how much of that property was stolen. And I can't call it another word. Now, I would love to be able to talk to some of you about the research and the work that I've done on my ancestors and how it goes back to the 1700s. Thanks for the opportunity. Andersons, Taborns, Johnsons. Johnsons were the indigenous people. Andersons were from Virginia. Taborns were from the Andersons, and others, Tylers and Kerseys.
Which tribe were the Johnsons?
I really don't know, and they're waiting for me to find out. I mean, I have cousins in California who call me frequently, trying to find out, did you get to that yet?
I can give you someone who can help you with
Well,
that. I
that
know
is
a
a-
genealogist in Pembroke.
Absolutely, I'd love to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have one more handout, and we need to begin to transition over to the special We're gonna do a workshop with Mark, and he has some slides, so I think there's at least one more question here.
Thank you very much. My name is Lester Ruth. I'm a church historian at Duke. And I have kind of a more theoretical question about the use of history for the public good. And I address it almost, not exclusively to our younger historians, but to all of us. If I understand correctly, the sociologists are predicting that by the mid-2040s, whites will be a numeric minority in the United States. And so I'm wondering, what's the best use of this sort of history to help our country lean into the future in a good and redemptive way?
You old pro with that. So you take the way. You from Penn State, so show us how.
Yeah.
From Penn
Well,
State.
you have to start with a laugh. First thing you have to say, John? Lester, sorry, Lester, is that we will be a numeric minority again. We have been a numeric minority before. We were a numeric minority for many hundreds of years. And I think, mentioning the Catawbas, the Saponis, the Tuscaroras, who are all here in your state, it's just important to acknowledge, right? Yeah, so we will be once again disciplined in our desire to possess this continent. And I think that's a good thing. How we use history, there are a couple of ways, I think. The first is that I think how do I want to say this? I probably shouldn't speak for white people in general because that category of being doesn't exist, but I'm going to try anyway. I think one of the things that frightens white people about that future is the sense that the stories that we've told, the history that we've told, which puts our contributions front and center and talks about our contributions as almost unmitigatedly good, that story is going to change. Our contributions are not going to stay front and center, and that story isn't going to be unmitigatedly good. We're going to have to become comfortable with a mixed story of, yeah, we made some contributions that matter. I mean, I think most people would say, the Declaration of Independence, that matters. Those ideas matter. Some of the industrial prosperity that white people take credit for, that matters, right? But it's not going to be a story of jumping from triumph to triumph to triumph. It's going to be a story of paying prices in justice, in human rights, in cruelty, in viciousness, in failure, and in spiritual corruption that we don't really want to admit we paid. So in some ways, I think the more we tell the stories of how the communities came together, what everybody on the continent learned from everybody else, what we learned from our failures as a people and as individual people, is the warm-up for understanding that this country isn't the product of white imagination. It's the product of a whole complicated life, that we all live together, natives, Africans, Europeans, we lived it all together. So telling these stories over and over and over, and especially telling them to the coming generation, you begin to chip away at the triumphalist white supremacy, and you begin to ready people to understand themselves as okay, you did your human best, and you screwed up a lot. I mean, who would tell you your own life story as unblemished triumph? None of us. Well, one person, I think his name is Donald Trump, but we're not listening to him anymore, okay? And we know what's behind that story. We know more and more than I ever wanted to know what's behind that story. Other than him, I don't think there's a living soul who would tell his or her own life story that way. So we need to talk about that. We don't need to tell our national story that way either. And that can help us move forward. Anyway, that's the best I got. It may not be enough.
Dr. Omar, why don't you take a shot at it?
Yeah, go ahead.
You take it.
Well, I'll just say, I think that was very helpful framing. And also to take it just one step further, that I think part of what we're also discovering is really just the complexity within these categories of whiteness, of blackness, of indigeneity. And I think that that's something that in some ways, for pedagogical purpose, for understanding, we put these categories, and there's something very specific about the experiences of Blackness in American history. So you don't want to take away with it, but at the same time, we should recognize the diversity of experiences within. I think that the framing is so well put, and it's very, very helpful. Let me give this to.
That's so good.
Oh, yeah. That's a ditto on that? Yeah. I really want to say thank you for redirecting to our up and coming historians here. But there is one more hand up, and I think that we will transition. What's that?
I have something to say before.
Okay, all right, we'll give this to the here.
I don't want to hog your program, but I do know a lot about these things. I think in order to help that young man and many others of my dear friends who have that same kind of question, I don't think you have to be that concerned about it because of the homogeneity of our whole people. When we have a family gathering now, there are lots of us there.
Yeah.
And once you take a DNA test and send that in, you get your results back, I think you will be surprised. You might even be my cousin. I, for many years, was following ancestry and genetics and all these things, and I was convinced to take a test. Well, the test came back, and my daughter started sending me shamrocks because it was in there.
Well, then we might be cousins.
And so we may very well be, and when we have a family reunion, it looks just like this room. It's all mixed up.
Yeah.
And nobody can call anybody else a color because all of them are represented.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me give Eddie the last word on this section, and then we're going to move to Mark Pace's discussion workshop. Yeah.
I just want to thank everybody that's coming, and I know I surprised a lot of people from Oxford. I got a lot of friends, haven't I?
Yes, you do.
All right, and you see where my friends are. I hate to expose them to. Now you see where my friends are. You thought I didn't have friends? Yeah, I got a lot of friends. I sure have. I have a young lady I want to stand. My niece came down from New York, and stand up. And you know how old people is every time they be talking, Granddaddy, why you talking that old crazy stuff? I'm tired of her, and I talk that old yang, and she said I talk so fast. But see, she don't pay any attention. You understand what I'm saying? And now she said, well, I'm gonna go come down and check this Uncle Eddie out and see, do he know what he's talking about? And check him out because he's getting old. I think he's senile. I think he's having dementia. That's all he talks about. But no, really, I appreciate she came down to work with her Uncle Eddie and meet my friends. And now she'll go back to New York and she'll start learning genealogy and history. And saying what my Uncle Eddie's saying makes sense in his collection. She makes looking at my collection, she's gonna say, now he's for real. And I need to get myself together and start working in his collection so I can take over and take it further than what it is. And Vera will tell her, Vera, it's a lot. You never finish it, am I right?
Never finish it.
Yeah, the students will take, am I right?
It's never done.
Tell her, and that's what I like about this work, you can finish it. And I appreciate everybody coming out. And Mark, the professor, gonna take over next. He gonna give us about 5 minutes to get down.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you wanna take about a 5-minute
Thank
break or so, you just head on through the double doors to the back end of the building to the right.
Thank you again. Just a round of applause for our roundtable. Thank you so much. And thank you for your questions and your engagement. And we'll take a few minutes and we'll go to the North Carolina room to follow Mark's. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.